Voilà, mes chers amis, je vous en prie, prenez place. Monsieur le secrétaire général du Sommet spatial international, cher général Adam, monsieur le directeur général des entreprises, cher Thomas Courbe, je remercie chaleureusement le général et le directeur général d'être venu spécialement de Paris pour être avec nous aujourd'hui. J'apprécie infiniment, cher Thomas, mon général, votre présence, comme l'ensemble du public qui est avec nous ce soir et que j'invite à prendre place. Ne soyez pas timide. Sehr geehrter Herr Dr. Thomas Reiter, sehr geehrte Vertreterinnen und Vertreter aus dem Bundesministerium für Forschung, Technologie und Raumfahrt, lieber Professor Dr. Frank Basner, ladies and gentlemen, mes chers amis, it's a great pleasure for my team, and what a team, Clémence Lefebvre, Guillaume Gomard, Jérôme Brouillet, bien sûr, in particular, and of course for me to welcome you all to the embassy on this very special occasion as we are gathered here this afternoon for this important event on bilateral cooperation between France and Germany in the field of space policy, co-organized with our dear friends from the Hertie School, Jacques Delors Centre in Berlin. There is a long-standing tradition of cooperation between the embassy and the Jacques Delors Centre within the framework of the Pariser Platz dialogues in particular. And I really want to thank the representatives, Hertie, of the Jacques Delors of the Jacques Delors Centre. So let me start actually by extending a very special word of thanks to Dr. Tu Nguyen, but also her team, wonderful team. So you are the acting director of the Centre Jacques Delors. Many thanks also to our distinguished panelists who will be introduced in a few minutes, and to our first-class moderators, liebe Wilhelmine Stenglin et chère Cécile Boutelet. C'est un privilège de vous avoir aujourd'hui pour nous et avec nous. So our discussion is part of a series of events entitled Research Meets Politics. And today's event will focus on the synergies of our two nations with regard to space policy from both a research and a political point of view. France and Germany, as you all know, are home to outstanding aerospace and defense companies with a unique know-how that can make the whole of Europe proud. And with this in mind, I'd like to express my warmer thanks to all the CEOs and business representatives who are here with us this afternoon. After all, without you, none of us would be sitting here today. I believe there could be no better time, no more crucial time for our event this afternoon in terms of the Franco-German relationship. Indeed, if we put things a little bit into perspective, as Europe is confronted with an unprecedented combination of existential threats, from the return of war to our continent, to the multiple attacks against our democracies from within and from without, to the risk of Europe lagging behind the US and China in the current tech revolutions, President Macron and Chancellor Merz share the conviction that only a European response, and therefore a Franco-German one, can meet these challenges and others, of course, like global warming and the loss of biodiversity and many others. And that's why, my dear friends, the President and the Chancellor have initiated the opening of a new chapter in the Franco-German relationship, the agenda of which was adopted by the bilateral summit held in Toulon last August, based on the Toulon agenda. And to give you just two examples among many others, our two countries have engaged into an unprecedented high-level strategic dialogue on nuclear deterrence, which says a lot about the level of trust between Paris and Berlin. They also have significantly increased their partnership in the current AI revolution. And so it should come as no surprise that Germany will be the guest of honor at the Vivatech show that will take place in Paris in a few days. And I think these two examples, again, among many others, illustrate the depth and breadth and dynamism of the Franco-German relationship. So my message here is that don't believe too much all the press and believe only the best and brightest of the journalists who are here with us this afternoon. Against this backdrop, and as agreed by our leaders, space has an important role to play in this new Franco-German momentum, both in itself, because it's a major topic, but also as space is one of the keys to both European sovereignty and European competitiveness, which are, if you think a little bit about it, the two faces of the same coin. And that's why, during their summit in Toulon last August, France and Germany have decided to join forces and establish a bilateral high-level task force on space, the first meeting of which took place a few days ago here in Berlin. Furthermore, at Berlin's Space Congress last September, Defense Minister Boris Pistorius made the groundbreaking announcement that Germany would invest 35 billion euros in space security. That announcement marked a turning point as it signaled a paradigm shift in Germany's space strategy. Germany now fully takes into account the dual civil-military nature of space policy. And remember, the war in Ukraine also started, after all, in space, specifically through strategic satellite communications. France, too, my dear friends, has fully recognized for quite a while the strategic importance of space. No one is better qualified to explain this than you, cher Général Philippe Adam. Before assuming your current position as Secretary General of the International Space Summit that will take place in Paris in September, you served as Space Commander of France. You will take the floor in a minute and you will confirm for sure that the French Space Command and the German Weltraumkommando are working hand in hand. In November 2025, both France and Germany unveiled their respective space security strategies, la Stratégie spatiale nationale on the French side, and the Weltraumsicherheitsstrategie on the German side, outlining the crucial role both nations must play in promoting and strengthening Europe's strategic autonomy in this crucial field. The same month, so in November 2025, the European Space Agency, as I'm sure you all know, hosted its Ministerial Council in Bremen, Germany, and agreed on a record 22 billion euros for ESA's budget, making Germany and France the largest contributors to the agency's budget. In the field of research, France and Germany are lucky to have, for the first time in history, a ministry on both sides of the Rhine dedicated specifically to space, led respectively by Philippe Baptiste in France and Dorothee Bär in Germany. This alignment of planets, if I may say so, of stars, if I should add, is a real opportunity for the Franco-German space partnership. And it's a great honor to greet Thomas Reiter, former ESA astronaut, as we all know, who now leads the Space and Security Department at the German Ministry of Research, Technology and Space. Lieber Thomas, if I may, vielen Dank, dass Sie heute hier bei uns sind. Yes. I'll be brief, otherwise you would not come again to the embassy. As announced by President Macron, and as I was referring to, an international space summit, ISS, will be organized on September 9 and 10th in Paris at the Grand Palais. I see this important event as a golden opportunity to give a boost to the Franco-German partnership in a European perspective and rejuvenate the Franco-German reflex on space policy. Needless to say, besides governments and industry, the civil society in a broader sense has a major role to play in this respect, and I'm delighted to welcome very distinguished think tanks and researchers from Centre Jacques Delors, from the IFRI, the Institut Français des Relations Internationales, also from the University of the Bundeswehr in München in particular. We need thinkers of your caliber and expertise to think out of the box and build new synergy. So, my dear friends, my warmest thanks again to each and every one of you for your presence here this afternoon, but also for your commitment. And without further ado, I'll now give the floor to our keynote speaker, mon général Philippe Adam. Merci beaucoup. Serre pas la main encore une fois.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for those very nice words. Good afternoon to you all. I'm quite impressed and proud to stand in front of you this afternoon to just give you a couple of words on a very important topic, of course, that is space. And why is it important? Not because I gave it almost or more than 3 years of my life, of course, as it was explained to you, but because I have the deep feeling that space is changing our lives, and it's changing itself for the better, but also for the worse for the future. So we have to look at that very closely all together. We all say space is strategic. We all see all the challenges that are ahead of us. We all see what is changing in space now. We see the acceleration in terms of satellite population, in terms of activity, in terms of the number of companies who are involved in space now. What we have some difficulties to imagine is what he has for us in the future and what are the tracks we need to avoid if we want to keep space as an essential asset or an essential domains for the development of our activities, whatever they are. In fact, space is everywhere, as you probably know, but I will not detail that. It will probably appear in the next panels. Of course, as a space commander and as a military, as an officer, I used to be paid to have always the pessimistic, reflection, to always see what is the most dangerous, to imagine the worst scenario that could happen. Now I've slightly changed, of course. I changed my clothes, and I have to wear a business suit now. And my perspective has to be changed as well. So I need to be also optimistic, and I need to see solutions, and I need to find solutions. And it's interesting to see that even in the military world, when you find solutions for your problems in space, you very quickly have to talk to everyone. And everyone is really everyone. You cannot keep your problems to yourself in the military because you will need to partner with the commercial sector, with industry, with other nations, whether they are your competitors or not. And at some point, we also have to imagine that sometimes you will have to talk and to cooperate and to synchronize things with your potential enemies. Of course, when they are your enemies and the war is open, it's a bit late. But you have to prepare all that. And even now, when you hear from time to time that the war in space has already begun, it's not an open war yet. But yes, it is serious, and we have to consider it very seriously. But if it's a war, if it's a concern for the military will bring solutions. They will try and to maintain and restore peace if necessary. Before everything is stabilized, of course, it's a concern for everybody. Just like on high seas or in other parts of the world, I let you imagine what I have in mind, what we have in mind right now. A disturbance somewhere is a disturbance for everybody. And in space, it's really especially true. You don't have borders, and you are operating in the same environment as your friends, but also as your foes. So you are encountering them every day, and you cannot avoid this confrontation, of course. So this discussion is really essential, and we need to imagine what it has in store, but also we have to imagine what we have to do to make sure that we can rely on space in the future as well. For that, if it's strategic, we have to imagine how the world will change, of course, and to orient that change. And because we are humanity and because we are civilized people, we think and we know that we can change things if we want. But to change things, we have to agree on a couple of things. That's really the purpose of the Space Summit. So now I'm switching slightly to a kind of different role because the summit is interesting. And it's capturing everything I needed when I was a space commander, in fact, and to this point of discussion where everybody meets, everybody discuss what they have in mind and what they can do and what they cannot do. And of course, it's important to have that very serious talk all together because we don't have much time for various reasons. And again, I think time is a very essential element of what's happening in space. When you launch something, of course, it's up there for years, sometimes decades, but you have to put it very quickly. And right now, the speed and the tempo has seriously accelerated. So we think that it's the right moment to have this discussion because we can see the trajectory, but there are still several possible futures, and we have to choose the one we want, and we have to make sure that we do what we need to go into the future we have chosen, of course, and we have to agree with everybody on that. It doesn't mean that we will avoid all conflicts, all possibilities of war, but at least we have to set some rules, and that's important. But it's not only about rules, of course, it's about many, many different things. And the summit that we organize in France in September, 9th and 10th of September in Paris, will encourage that discussion. We'll make sure that we compare, we can discuss our point of views, we can agree and disagree on some points. We don't need to agree on everything. That's not the goal. I see it as a very diplomatic summit. And when I'm asked about what are really the deliverables, what do we expect from that summit, it can sound pretty fuzzy, but really I think that my goal and how I imagine the success of the summit is that everybody was happy to be in Paris to have this kind of discussion and will be longing for the next round of discussion somewhere, not necessarily in Paris or anywhere, in a different place, but continue this kind of discussion. The summit will propose, of course, we have to do that, a couple of deliverables in terms of declaration. We expect to have everybody can come and declare things. But of course, we will prepare some declarations. It is important also to identify, if we can, groups of agreeing nations that will be important for the next discussions. It's certainly not the aim is certainly not to build regulation or law in Paris or to replace the bodies that are in charge of this kind of result, of course. And I'm thinking here ITU or United Nations. So really the point is make sure that we have a serious discussion, a strategic discussion at the right level on a very strategic situation and in a strategic domain, which is space. To come briefly on what I have in mind for the summit, and again, there are many dots to link together. And if it's strategic, it's always the case. When you think strategic, of course, you see that everything is important, everything has something to say. Probably some aspects are more important than others, but you cannot eliminate some of the aspects when you talk about autonomy, sovereignty, this kind of thing. We have to consider it fully and to make sure that we have examined all the possibilities, in fact, around, and to choose the right option, but also identify the other options. If your main option fails, of course, you have to imagine the other means you will use and the other ways you can develop to reach your goals. The discussion in Paris will be organized. You probably see the papers about that. There are 4 pillars at the summit that have been announced. 3 of them will constitute strands or avenues of discussion in Paris. So one for science and exploration. It's more dedicated to really the future, what we have to look for in space, developing new things, how far we can see, how far we want to go in space, this kind of thing. The second part is more terrestrial, of course, is the space economics. How do we develop that sector? We see it exploding, of course, right now. Things are changing fast, but we need to organize it if we want to control what's happening. We need to organize it probably a little bit more than it is organized now, but we have also to make sure we deliver in time. And I say we think that time is of the essence there, and if we want to be efficient, we have to be quick, and if we want to be quick, we have to be well organized and know exactly what we are doing all together, or not, if we choose that. Of course, in all that, there are some different ways of seeing with different perspectives we need to take, and we want to offer them all in Paris. The third avenue discussion is more related to security, of course. That's, of course, something very important. But again, security is used also to realize that it's important. If it's important, there will be a high competition. We don't want that competition to evolve or to slip into a full open war, of course. So this is an important subject, but also it has a tendency to drive the way we want to do things in the other domains. The fourth pillar is a more pillar about international regulation, and this is more a political, of course, part. It will be it will be discussed during the last part of the summit. That's what I propose for the time being. It's really the last part of the discussion where we will have a big declaration, and of course those discussions we have about, okay, what should we discuss next year at the UN level, for example, can be discussed beforehand, and we can present what are the positions of all the actors and all the participants. So again, I think that we don't want, or we can't imagine that we will solve many problems, but we can imagine some ways for the future, in fact, and to sketch some of those solutions. And now the important point will be to make sure that we can implement those solutions that we have imagined, even if we don't know exactly how to describe those solutions, of course. That's for the future. I insist on the fact that it is an international summit. Of course, it is in France. We have a special interest in the success of this summit, obviously. The other important, or the other elephant in the room, of course, is Europe. What is Europe as a space power, and what we want for Europe, in Europe itself, but in the members as well. But we don't need to have that discussion in front of all the others. And what is important is also that all the nations in the world will be present in Paris, of course. And we are here also we're there to expose our positions, but also here to listen to their positions, especially if they disagree. And we know that many nations will disagree on what we have in mind in Europe, of course, and you know exactly who I'm thinking about there. But we expect that they will be there. We expect them to express their positions, and from this discussion, we can see some light for the future. At least we can see where are our interests and what we have to do to secure those interests in all the dimensions that I described so far. On that, the preparation for the summit, of course, are progressing. As usual, there is not enough time. As usual, we are late on schedule, of course, and probably you noticed that the official invitations have not been sent out yet. There are some difficulties to do so, but the program is shaping up nicely along the lines that I described, and I expect them to be put online. So we'll have an official website for the summit, of course, that will describe all that, and they probably will give you a much better idea of how it will be run in Paris than what I could explain. But the point is that it's the first of its kind. And again, if successful, all the participants will be very happy to have been in Paris for 2 days. They would be very happy to have been the opportunity to discuss with so many important, interesting, visionary people. And by the way, of course, this summit is also, we will offer the opportunity to have as many bilateral as you like. Of course, on an international level, of course, that is more encouraged than anything, but we know also that when people travel, they also want to meet, and we'll try to maximize the opportunities in that regard. But the summit will be measured in the possibility or in the will or in the need to have another of such a summit somewhere in the future, and not too far in the future, of course. So we can imagine that it could be a yearly event or a 2-yearly event, for example, and we don't have to have it necessarily in Paris, of course. What we need is make sure that those very serious subjects are discussed at the proper level, and we want to make it interesting for everybody, and that's my main goal, and that's how I will measure the success. And as I say, as usual, if it's a success, everybody will forget about me the day after. If it's a failure, everybody will remember me, of course. But this is not a problem. I'm paid for that. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer to questions whenever you like, of course. My details are not difficult to find. Of course, I will take questions here when I'm here. Pretty happy to have a discussion with you here in Berlin. Thank you very much.
I think I would just like to invite all my panelists right there on stage, and we just start the discussion. So this works perfectly. So thank you very much for being here. This panel will focus on security in space and the very simple question of how to organize and coordinate European assets. And we've already heard that European or space has become strategic and a security competition. And the war in Ukraine has showed that space is becoming more important. Tensions with the US make it ever more important for Europe to also get a kind of, we've heard it, European strategic autonomy in space. And Europe is reacting. ESA has a record budget of 22 billion for the next 3 years, and France and Germany have national space strategies. And I'm very happy to discuss all that today with my panelists. We've already heard, we have here today Antje Nötzold. She's a senior researcher from the University of the Bundeswehr in Munich, and she's a leading expert in everything related to space and also arms control. Paul Wohrer, he's the head of the space program at IFRI, and his work covers everything geopolitical, strategic, industrial, and technological when it comes to space. So we have it all here. Thank you very much for joining us. And then the two government representatives, Thomas Reiter Thomas Reiter, he's the head of space and security department at the German Federal Ministry of Research, Technology and Space. And we've heard you are a former astronaut as well, and also a retired general of the German Air Force. So really the perfect combination for this security in space panel. And last but not least, Thomas Courbe, Director General for Enterprises at the French Ministry of the Economy. And before that, you've held several positions at the French Treasury, and you began your career at the Ministry of Defense. So also a very good combination for this panel. Thank you very much for being here. So to begin with, I would like to hear from the government representatives. We've heard about the space strategies, and I would like to give you the opportunity for a quick elevator pitch of what is the key priorities in these space strategies. And maybe we start with the French strategy and then we go over to the German space strategy.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. To be quick, I would say that the first simple idea is that security starts with autonomy, which is an old idea in Europe since the 60s when Germany and France had their first space capabilities. Now it extends to a lot of other services in space and also to resilience. And resilience is one of the key pillars of our national space strategy, together with obviously autonomous access to space, but also competitiveness of the satellite industry and other aspects such as science and exploration or European or international influence. And the summit that was just described contribute to that objective. To reach these objectives, and it was said, the amounts of budgets that are allocated in Europe to space have increased significantly. Obviously, the 35 billions of Germany, we have for the 26 to 2030 period allocated 10 billions as a part of this strategy. ESA 22 billion, and we hope in the MFF, in the future budget of the EU, to have a significant budget also for space. So we see there's increased levels of commitment, financial commitment, but at the same time, we can recall that the US in the only year of 2025 has allocated 70 billion. So we know the only solution for Europe is to combine our efforts in that regard, and we have some recent examples of how we have combined these efforts. Very recently with the GovSatcom, which has been used in Cyprus in March as a very concrete step on how Europe can pool its resources under EU leadership, and I will come back to that on governance. It's a very important aspect. Obviously, IRIS Square is another way of how we can combine our efforts for a very critical need, both for commercial and defense. And we are now feeling that it is urgent that the military service of IRIS Square in Leo is available as soon as possible, probably 2030, because of the context the ambassador recalled in the beginning of this exchange. And later on, the future Earth observation for governments, constellation can be another kind of the way to combine our efforts by pooling and sharing resources for governments to have another tool for decision making in terms of security and defense. And to conclude, security in space is also very strongly linked to governance, and so we have seen that we need to do much more in space capabilities for security. We also need to have probably a clearer governance, and in that regard, we feel that ESA expertise is very important to make the technology that we need credible, to mature these technologies. But as long as security and even more defense are concerned, it is a matter for the governments, for EU and the EU governments. So probably this governance, which is ongoing, should be clarified, considering the challenges we face, to have Europe fully prepared to deal with these challenges.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reiter, what's your elevator pitch?
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to start, as you have mentioned, astronauts with a few words on a topic which I think gives hope, because space, apart from the topic that we will be discussing on security and military aspects, I think it's still a lighthouse for international cooperation. And there is a French astronaut, Sophie Adenau, currently on board the International Space Station. Recently, there have been 2 French astronauts assigned to a commercial mission to VAST, and in Europe we have an international European astronaut corps which is working in this international context, and even, let's say, the potential adversary Russia is part of it. So what I want to say with this short introduction, there is still hope for the future. Nevertheless, we should not be naive, and Thomas, you mentioned it correctly, the situation is very critical. Indeed, I would like to thank the organizers for discussing this aspect of space security strategy here. It's really needed. The starting point for this topic is certainly the space security strategies that were published about the same time, and indeed, as you have said, they are not too far apart from each other. I think we are pretty much in line in the assessment of the threats. Obviously, it's Russia, it's China, and to substantiate that with some examples, very recently there has been an attempt by a Russian satellite to avoid or disturb transfer of Earth observation data in Ukraine. We know in the past there have been many occasions where Russian, Chinese satellites were closing up to European satellites, telecommunication satellites. And even more, if we think back about last year in February, I think it was the case when the Secretary General of NATO, Mr. Rutte, mentioned that there is a risk that Russia might even bring nuclear weapons to orbit, which would be very severe threat, considering the fact how much our modern economies depend on space assets, telecommunication. Even if there is no war, we depend on these assets very much. And in that assessment, I think we are very much close to each other. Maybe just to mention at this point, please forgive me, I'm an engineer, so I'm always linked to giving examples. You know, one of the reasons why I think Russia and China is pretty good, they are practicing proximity operations almost from day to day. Russians since a long time, bringing a Soyuz spacecraft to the Russian space stations, to Mir, now to ISS. The same are doing the Chinese. And proximity operations is one of the big threats that we are now seeing in orbit. And while it can be good if you want to repair another satellite, it can be a military threat to our systems by disturbing that. So obviously this architecture, this security architecture must provide answers to these threats, and that can be only done through resilience, agility, responsiveness or responsive space, defense capabilities in general. And yes, you have already heard the number a couple of times. The German space security strategy is supported by 35 million euros. So all the aspects that are mentioned in this strategy are supported by concrete projects. And I think that is a big step forward for Germany, but I think also in a European context. Now, apart from this funding that we see to support the implementation of this space security strategy, you heard we have funding also in ESA, and I will not expand to that too much at the moment. I think, Thomas, you covered that very well. We have a national program, a national space program for innovation and international cooperation, which has declined a little bit in the last years, but obviously this is a very important part, and I know it's exactly the same in France to develop national capabilities that then can be used on European level with ESA, with EU, and so forth. So I think that is a very, very important aspect to do the required R&D that is needed to sustain and to extend our capabilities in various areas, be it telecommunication, Earth observation, aspects like I just said, proximity operations. Now, to illustrate space security architecture, I think it's a good example to think in layers like an onion. So at the core, we see the sovereign military capabilities, and around that are positioned additional layers like civil and commercial space, or contributions from that, and contributions from partners, and of course the European Union. So the German space security architecture will be integrated into a broader European architecture, which shall also serve as a strong European pillar in the NATO. And with the last remark, I would like to end my pitch. I've now attended a lot of discussions discussing about the military aspects of space and the threats we can expect. We should not forget that also from a safety aspect, we are running into a situation in orbit that is quite critical because there are quite a lot of satellites. Alone in the last year, more than 4,000 satellites were launched. We had more than 330 or 300 something launches. And these numbers will increase. As you all know, we have more than 15,000 active satellites in orbit. And we should always keep in mind that in a time where, let's say, tensions increase, where it's getting more and more difficult, we could see events that are not intended, but could make a real blow to the whole infrastructure that is in space. Yeah? And I'm talking about unintended collisions. By the way, just very recently, a few weeks ago, the last space environment report by our colleagues from ESA was released. I can only recommend this lecture. It's very good, a lot of nice diagrams there. The most important ones are on the first pages. So if you find time, just go on the internet, you can download it. And that gives you an impression how critical the situation is, even if we look beyond military aspects. And with that, I would like to end just to give a last pitch to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's perfect for you to now give your view on the German space security strategy, which is actually a first. And you're deep into the details. So if you could share, both have mentioned that the French and the German vision is actually not that far apart. What's your view in that, and how do you look at the strategies?
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation, for being here. And for those who maybe read some of my articles or media appearances or podcasts in the last months, you know that I really appreciate the first German space security strategy, and I really praised it for having a real threat assessment, for having ambitious political goals, and especially for having these lines of action and the concrete project, and having it with an underbelly of financial resources. So I will not go and praise it anymore here, so I would rather try to focus on the title of the whole conference, Building a European Security Architecture in Space, and would highlight two aspects it would need to build this security architecture, and also put the finger on some challenges we will face, and also in the French-German context of space cooperation. So what it first needs to have this European security architecture is not by surprise. We need space capabilities. So we need to develop more capabilities, and here we need European assets and these new national capabilities. And we need greater cooperation. And we already see that this is started on a European level. We have now, for the first time, a commissioner for defense and space. Not only for space, but it's related to defense. And we see like the GovSatcom, which was already mentioned, is active now. And we also have the European Space Shield initiative. So we already see that we need more coordination on these levels. So we have a dynamic that is good. We also have a huge dynamic in national assets, building up national assets and capabilities. So that makes us as European countries individually stronger, but it has the risk of becoming even more fragmented in space. So we really face the challenge to have more coordination on this dynamic environment. And this under time pressure, we always talk about it 2029 in an optimistic point of view. And we also have now we have not only established space countries, we mentioned Germany, France, UK, Italy, we're having more and more countries in Europe that are active in space and contributing kind of niche capabilities. Poland, for example, Finland with ICI and so on. We have more we have out there, but it's also more of the question of how to get it into interoperability. How to make it possible that everyone can contribute it. And this also is a challenge. Besides, we are creating kind of national space ecosystems. We all want to foster our national air and space industry. We also want our new space sector. So how we can getting out of this competition that everyone on the table can profit on it. And we have a second need we have to address, and that's to secure our infrastructure we put into space. What we need, first we need strategies. And so that's very good. We have now strategies, and it's also good that they are not that far away, that we share the common goals and the common things we want to reach. And that we also all need more resilience. And here it's also good that we build up all these capabilities, but we need to be able to have them as a redundancy systems also. So we hear, again, the need to step up coordination and cooperation. We need more defense capabilities to secure the things. And here also it was mentioned that ESA is now also having not only a new highest budget ever, but we also see that we have now the program of European resilience in space. So ESA is also now aware of that. Space is dual use, and they are not hiding for possible military aspects. They are talking about how we can actively contribute to defense in space. And we need the political will for a credible deterrence. And that's something very crucial. It is already also mentioned in the European Space Security Strategy that we need this political will, that we need to show that we will react if there are threats in space to be credible. And a very crucial aspect I think we are lacking, and it's an aspect that's starting to get discussed at the moment. We need maybe shared or divided responsibilities in all these actions. So most important is we need a commonly accepted European lead in this field. And here we see different initiatives coming from the French side. We see the initiatives from the German side, which was already mentioned in the Space Security Strategy. More bit of hide it in the lines of action, like the European Space Component Command, which was now more highlighted in the last weeks, getting more expressed that it is an ambitious goal of the Germans, that they want to also take the lead in these fields, but it must be accepted. And last but not least, I just want to briefly mention further challenges that are also crucial for our defense and security in space, which might not only lead in our hand, meaning in the hands of the political or military level. So the first thing is the time. We talked about 2029 on best terms. The launcher challenge. So we are still lacking more than two European launchers. So the micro launcher challenge will be crucial, and also having European spaceports, not only the French one but across the Atlantic, but here also for resilience possibilities, and also the acceleration aspect. It was mentioned with the numbers. Not only 15,000 active satellites in space, 4,500 even launched last year. If you just count all these proposed mega constellations that are already starting to be built up, Starlink, Amazon Leo, TerraWave, the two Chinese ones, Starshield, you're getting 70,000 new satellites in the next decade. So that's why the German Weltraumsicherheitsstrategie rightly is named in the English expression Space Safety and Security Strategy. And we have more dynamic. It was mentioned one by McKinsey that space is now at a point where internet was in the 1990s. So that just gives you an impression where we might head in space in the next decade. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A lot of points that we can unpack later on, hopefully. Mr. Wohrer, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, first of all. Very sorry that I'm speaking last because most of the excellent points that I wanted to make have already been made, but it doesn't hurt to repeat some of them. I just wanted to start maybe not by quoting directly from the French space strategy, but rather from another document that is the National Strategic Review from last year. And that if we take a more of a geopolitical view of the current situation that we see in space, this strategic review talks about the risk of a major high-intensity war in Europe, for France outside of our national territory, involving France and its allies, particularly European ones, by 2030. I've heard the number 2029, that is also a possible date. But if we just anticipate this kind of major upset to our common security in Europe, and when we have witnessed over the last few years the importance that space has had on the battlefield in Ukraine, but also in Iran and in other places of conflict, one can't look at those events and not think about the capabilities that we would need for such an upsetting and important event. I'm not trying to say that everything is going to happen, but I also think that a space posture will increase, not deterrence, that might not be the right term, but discourage for a potential adversary to attack Europe. And so I think this is important to think about security from space in those kind of terms. If in the near future, with all the projects that have been quoted here, we manage to establish near total transparency of the battlefield with advanced ISR capabilities, and we also see that innovations in this domain do not only come from space, they also come from new data management such as AI capabilities that are also for a part developed in Europe. Jam and cyber resistant position, navigation and timing capabilities through our Galileo constellation, for instance. We have the start of that type of capability, and we'll talk about LEO PNT now and those type of projects. And also one of the major and most important capability, of course, is high bandwidth and low latency communications. And those are part of the number of projects that are currently being developed. Let's say the concern I have at the moment as an independent researcher is to witness that the current fragmentation that we are witnessing in Europe, that might in another context entail resilience to a certain point. It's not necessarily bad to have many different systems, doing almost the same type of service. If, for instance, with the increase in cyber threats, it might be good to have networks that are not necessarily interconnected, etc., to ensure resilience. However, the current development of what we are witnessing in the industry, you mentioned that space was at the state that the internet was at the beginning of the 1990s. I have another analogy that might not be entirely accurate, as any analogy never is, but it's that I would compare space more to the state of the automobile industry in 1913, when Ford just released the Ford T, and suddenly you go from the type of industrial organization that is more akin to workshop type of activity directly to a vertically integrated mass production of capabilities. And so that's what concerned me, is that is the type of fragmentation that we see in Europe and that we are witnessing in the space domain conducive to the level of industrial development that we would need given the current state of development of the industry, especially in terms of vertical integration, etc. Is that something that we could imagine in the future in Europe? Is that something that is achievable? Those are the type of question that I'm having. So thank you very much for the invitation and happy to discuss.
Thank you very much. Small questions you're raising here. Maybe I would like to set the scene again, because we've mentioned Russia and China, but we haven't touched upon the US that much. And there is a lot of dependencies in Europe on US assets in space. I would like to hear from both of you how big you think are those dependencies and how much of autonomy are we actually seeking? Because we're speaking about European strategic autonomy, but what exactly does that mean? Which of those capabilities that we now have from the US in future have to be provided by Europe? Maybe if we can start with you, Mr. Reiter.
Yes, thank you. Of course, it's very clear that our supply chains, to a certain extent, are dependent on suppliers from the US. There is no doubt about it. I wouldn't say at the moment it's a very critical. There is an interdependency because there are also assets, or let's say suppliers from Europe that are essential for the US. And as long as this interdependency is existing, I think we can be still kind of calm. Nevertheless, I think our both intention is to get to a higher level of independency on the supply chains, which doesn't mean autonomy that we can produce everything completely here. I don't think there is a need at the moment. But especially in this overall scenario that we have now detected, clear the way is towards getting the supply chains a little bit more independent from all around the world. And by the way, it's not only US, as you know, in the field of microelectronics, Taiwan and others. In terms of services, okay, I mean, we are still using GPS without knowing it. I mean, in our mobile phones, you cannot even choose if you would rather use GPS or Galileo. But as long as we have two systems, and the decision to build Galileo was exactly with this in mind, that the moment you have an independent system, you know, the other side cannot just say, I switch it off or I ask for a fee. So I think also this is on still a good track. Galileo has become a very remarkable system in terms of precision. It's top. The developments towards PRS, publicly regulated service, so a kind of encrypted service that will be also needed for military applications, I think is the next logical step, miniaturizing the receivers in exactly that direction. And the last topic, of course, is telecommunication. Obviously, Starlink is in many respects an interesting case, not only because the incredible number of satellites, they have more than 10,000 active satellites now in orbit. So apart from this aspect of space domain management, this leads now to the question, and General Adam has addressed it, spectrum management. And I think that is an area where we really need to be aware of, and it will be a topic in the summit, certainly, because here we need to see that we protect the demands in Europe to protect the spectrum for our users, for the citizens, and also for military applications. And a last point on that, or last consideration from my side, I mean, we see that there are still quite some US companies situated in Europe. Just yesterday I visited Planet Labs here in Berlin, which is around the corner, very interesting. And I mean, they have done a remarkable development. You might be all aware that very recently Rocket Lab has purchased Mynaric, a company which is building laser communication terminals. I'm not so happy that this happened, but nevertheless, it's okay. But, you know, this also interlinks the US space economy to the European space economy. And that is, in the moment, not bad. So there are interdependencies, and I see that as an advantage. So the call to become completely autonomous, I don't think that is really needed at the moment. Nevertheless, there are key areas, and I give you the last example, and then I will stop. In the field of microelectronics, obviously, for example, for telecommunications, Earth observation, we are dependent on very specific integrated circuits, ASICs and FGPAs. And these are areas, I think, which we definitely need in Europe. If there are other sources, very good. It's always good to have multiple sources. But that is one example where I say this is one of those areas that we need to build up these capabilities in Europe.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you.
Yeah. Thank you. I started my introduction by mentioning that security is first autonomy, and I agree with Thomas that this autonomy applies only to the most critical services, technologies, and also resources. And so in services, again, we have had a focus in autonomous access to space since the 60s, but we have to remind that 2 years ago, we had 2 years without autonomous access to space for Europe before Ariane 6 maiden flight. And it was a period where we saw that we were fully dependent from SpaceX, in fact, even for institutional launches. And this is why IRIS² is so important, because it will bring an autonomous European LEO communication service that is that we need imperatively and that we need urgently because of the context. This is another dimension of this autonomy we have to acquire. On technologies, I share Thomas' view, and it is also one of the merits of IRIS² to catch up our technology, the technologies we will master, so that in the end, in the full version of IRIS², it will be fully European technologies, that is for the critical functions, as Thomas explained. So this is for service, technologies and resources. Thomas mentioned the spectrum, and in that regard, there are the two elements which will indeed, both of them will be in the summit, discussed in the summit, which is interference, and this is part of the debate. It will be a strong debate in the ITU 2027 conference, where the question of how we should manage these rules on interference that have allowed in very good conditions when they are respected to deploy both GEO and LEO, even large number of LEO satellites. So this will be a key question. Should this rule evolve? We think they can evolve, but they can evolve while preserving this coexistence of solutions. It will be debated at international level. And second, resource. And we, just as for terrestrial communications, we see how valuable space spectrum is for Europe. And so we are also convinced that this is one resource linked to security and autonomy, and we should reflect on that also during the summit. And the recent proposal by the Commission for the allocation of the 2 gigahertz MSS, so direct-to-device band, in our view, so it has to be discussed, and we want to discuss it with Germany first to make sure we agree on the principles. But in principle, we feel the Commission's proposal is a positive one, while preserving competition, preserving European institutional needs, and some market space for European actors. So this is another illustration on how this resource is also strategic.
Thank you very much. I think it's very interesting, this take on autonomy, and that interdependence can basically save us from being rejected from the US. What's your take on that? Do you think that's the right ambition that is being displayed here? So we have to be sharing.
Yeah, thank you very much. So maybe I add something on. So I share all the stuff that is mentioned on the supply chains, and that we need to. There's a lot of interdependence. Maybe add a few points on the capabilities in military aspects. We are still very dependent, and then you will see, if you're familiar, what we are going to address with the German 35 billion. You will see that we will go or address a lot of these capability gaps we have in Europe with the German program with the strategy we had last year. So we are very dependent, for example, on missile defense. And when you look at in Ukraine, you see that there's a higher vulnerability if we don't have own missile defense capabilities and also missile detect capabilities. We have still lacking better or more advanced systems in SATCOM, signal intelligence, and Earth observation, especially with regard to LEO constellations. You rightly heard about it. We are now having kind of transparent battlefields, real-time warfare, and also we need capabilities for AI. We also need to incorporate this, because we don't, at the moment, we are not lacking information. We are lacking the right information at the right time. So we already have a lot of constellations, but we might get a kind of information overload. So we need to have also the capabilities to decide and to what are the right information and how you bring them together. For example, when you have optical Earth observation and you have SAR Earth observation, how can you make this interrelated coming together? And also counter-space capabilities. So at the moment, as we heard sometimes from the German military satellites, we are blind and dumb in space. So we don't have the possibility to see what's going around them in space, and also to be able to act in space. So we need, for credible deterrence, we need the possibility to have possibilities to react, to defend our systems. And so here I see a lot of Germany and projects. We started with the strategy and with the 35 billion on a very good way. When I think about Spock, when I think about the Shield and Sword satellites, when I think about SATCOM level 4, which is a kind of a LEO constellation for satellite communications. So they might not close, but kind of making the capability gaps in Europe a bit smaller. And all of this is not meaning being against the transatlantic cooperation, especially in NATO. It's more about bringing something additionally on the table. So raising the resilience for all of us, and also being a valuable partner if you have something to bring to the table. As also the US Space Force already said, space is a team sport. So they are also aware that they also cannot do it all on their own.
Yeah, thank you very much. A very big list of capability gaps. And in a recent study from ISS, it was said that there's a lot of investments. We've heard the 35 billion, we've heard the 10 billion from France. We know from ESA there's a bigger budget. But there's no coherent strategy, it says, when it comes to combining those investments. So if you had a wish for free, how to build this coherent strategy? It's a very simple question, I know, but
I can do that in less than 2 minutes in front of you without a problem. I think what we're doing right now today, talking about it, and just seeing how close we are in our various positions is actually part of the solution. You know, it's the cooperation starts with a discussion and just understanding each other and understanding the common needs, I would say, that we can express. You mentioned that we have critical capability gaps in early warning satellites. There's the Jewel project that is currently ongoing, so that's something that we are going to be working on in Europe together. You mentioned counterspace. The initial the French defense strategy from 2019 actually had a new doctrine of active defense. So that is something that is envisioned, and there are programs that are currently in development for that type of capability. Otherwise, we have capabilities, I would say, in Europe. We have a lot of them over the entire spectrum space capabilities. We have access to space. We have capabilities for space surveillance. We have capabilities for ISR, navigation, space telecommunication. So we pretty much have the broad spectrum, and we have a lot of. We also have an extremely mature industry that is able in Europe to do all these type of things, and over I would say a broad range of technologies. We have radar, radar observation, optical observation, etc. The idea of putting all these assets, you know, in using all these capabilities that we already have and the ones that we would like to develop, I think is a critical aspect of the future of our cooperation. Because if we have the same objective, if we envision, we have a global means to attain this objective, and we know how to attain these objectives, and that's a very good start, actually. And I think we probably agree on most of those elements. So the real challenge, I would say, is implementation and time. And where do we put our efforts? I have absolutely no doubt that we would know how to achieve the objectives that we want to accomplish. The critical aspect is time and implementation right now.
Yeah, and you mentioned speaking to each other, and you also mentioned before that Germany in the space strategy basically offered to be a European anchor state, offered to be the one leading the conversation. How is that perceived in France, and has that already started, that Germany is basically reaching its hand out to get the conversation going?
Again, I think the needs are such that in any case we have to combine our efforts. So we see very positively the fact that Germany has put in place a very ambitious strategy, huge amounts of financing, because the challenges are such that we need everyone's efforts. The question, I think. The key question, I think, will be, are we efficient together? The word fragmentation was mentioned. So I think our key element is how to combine these efforts so that they are coherent, and including, to take a very concrete example, the constellation, telecommunication, military constellation, national constellation from Germany and IRIS². Can they be complementary? And we want to work on that. It's a challenge, because we know that making two telecommunications constellations interoperable is quite difficult on a technical point of view. It's even more difficult than when it was not planned beforehand, before design. So we know it's a challenge, but we feel it's very important to work on that together to make sure that all these efforts are combined in a coherent way that globally increase our capacity and capabilities in space that meet globally the European members' needs. So we think it is feasible, and we want to do that, and so we view very positively all the efforts that are made. Maybe just one short addition, coming back to dependencies from the US. I think that there are fields where, and I said that, where we are catching up technologies. For example, IRIS² in the end will master state-of-the-art technologies, but it's a catch-up. From what the US do, or US companies do. I think there are fields where innovation from companies in Europe, in particular from startups, can put us in the race. And you mentioned missile defense, and I will say that under the control of two former Air Force generals that are just close to me. But my feeling is that there are certain fields in missile defense or drones defense, where some European startups are proposing state-of-the-art solutions, and there are fields where, through innovation, through our joint efforts in innovation, I think we can be in this race and innovate to propose new solutions also for all our strategic needs in general.
Yeah, please do jump in.
I just want to challenge you on Iris Square, because I know it's highly debated and you can have very different possible views on it. And I know it's, when you talk about Galileo, when we talk about Copernicus, they are really high standards. So Copernicus is the gold standard for observation. Galileo is more accurate than GPS. But if we think about Iris Square, and also something that you mentioned, that we see like these changes in the production, you mentioned with the analogy to Ford and the assembly line production, that's something that's now also happening in space. And so that's why I was challenging Iris Square, not saying that it's might not be compatible with the SATCOM level 4. But I don't think when we have Iris Square finally in orbit in 5 years, or starting have it in orbit, it might be outdated. Why? Because we had the whole the innovation cycle are more and more dynamic, and the whole system, the industry is changing from assembly, from individual manufacturing to assembly production. When you see that in Europe, it takes 5 years to bring a big satellite into orbit, also like these SAR satellites, several satellites, and then we have it like 5 to 10 to 15 years of lifetime. When you compare it now with these LEO constellations, you have now every week up to 100 Starlink terminals getting up in space. They are supposed to have a lifetime of 5 years. They're getting deorbit after 3 because they need the place for the newer advanced innovations. So when we start now with Iris Square, with having now the technical considerations now defined, and then we're going to produce it and put it in space in 5 years, I'm pretty sure it will be outdated. Even though we have interesting aspects like multi-domain constellation, like public-private partnership, which is innovative and new, I doubt that it will be like Galileo or the other things, the up-to-date standard then.
You have to respond to that quickly, but I just want to make a quick remark that we, at 3 o'clock, both of you have to leave, and we have the opportunity for questions before that, 1 or 2 from the audience. So a brief answer to that, please.
Okay. No, very briefly, I think it raises the question of the 2 constellations we are dealing with. Do we want them to be US supplied or European supplied? And today, and that's why I mentioned catch up, because today I think well, we have to say that no European manufacturer can today do what Starlink is doing in terms of technology. So this is why our choice is to say we have to catch up. We have to catch up through technology that will be mastered by European companies. And this is our answer. So catching up, obviously we're late by definition. When you catch up, you're late. But it is more important to have these technologies mastered than to be over-dependent, in particular on critical functions. And second, today what we see that existing OneWeb capabilities are already today useful for armed forces in Europe. So they deliver a service. It's already an additional service that does not exist in any other configuration, and this is a progress in itself, and we want to build upon that kind of steps.
Mr. Reiter, if you maybe also can touch upon how you want to make sure that SATCOM-BW4 is going to be interoperable with Iris Square.
Very nice. Well, as long as both systems are using the laser communication terminals, I think there is a good hardware baseline to ensure compatibility afterwards. And of course, in this context, I want to mention this activity protocol stack for space, which is the foundation of ensuring compatibility. But let me at least say words on one point, which I think is very important by what Ms. Nötzold said. The capability to do mass production in satellites is something where Europe is underdeveloped yet. So clearly this is a capability we need, and it's for our space industry quite important to develop that. And I fully agree, it has many aspects. One of them is the regeneration cycle, so no doubt we need to go in that direction. I would like to say a word about this point you brought up about this leadership. I mean, let's face it, in NATO, the space component has not been very well developed in the past. So obviously, as this is now growing and the importance is rising, I think it's normal that my comrades from the military, and I think the same is true for all European countries, they see there are areas where they can bring in capabilities which will be, of course, under the central control of NATO. So it's not just leadership of Germany versus others, it's just bringing in a certain capability, and the European Space Component Center is exactly an example for that. And if you allow me a last word on the aspect of fragmentation that Mr. Wohrer said, I think that's a very interesting point. For me, it's always the question, what is the better solution? If you make a big plan, a central plan, and then you implement it, then you have very good control, exactly the performance of all elements and so forth. And there is advantage to it. And the other variant is, of course, the system of systems, which we are obviously pursuing. It takes longer. It takes more time to see where it's compatible. But at the end, I think it carries much higher resilience, especially in times of crisis and even of war, which we hope we can avoid by deterrence. But I think this aspect of fragmentation, as you said, and you mentioned even the positive part, I can only agree to it. The right combination and the right way of, defining interfaces in both ways, technical and also in an operational way, is the key to the success here.
Thank you very much. So, unless you want to respond to that, I want to open up for one question from the audience, no pressure. And if there's two, we can do that as well. Even better, because the time is limited. If there's no question from the audience, then I would like to give you the floor again, because you have wishes for free. If there was if there was one thing that you'd say, this has to be changed within the next 5 years when it comes to coordination among Europeans, and to maybe avoid fragmentation, then what would you ask the governmental representatives for? Or for the summit in September?
It's not a good question. Like one thing I think is not going to change it. As you mentioned, it's a process. It's probably a system of system also in the way those decisions are made. We have to have many points of contact and make sure that we understand each other. We have barely spoken about industry, but the industrial aspect of it and the So I'm anticipating, but the cooperation goes also in those various levels. So it's important, and I think. I think it's important also to be important to share the experience of those who are actually have experience with the new type of warfare experience that we see in Ukraine and we see in other parts of the world, and how not only is space much more important, and everybody is aware of that, but how it's actually used nowadays, and the fact that it evolves so quickly. As you mentioned, that a lot of the solutions that are anticipated can evolve extremely quickly, and the fact that it's so linked to the digital aspect that is also evolving extremely quickly. So I don't want to see one thing change in the next 5 years. I want to see many things changing and changing very fast.
I think having the conversation with Ukraine is always a good advice at the moment when it comes to all those things. Thank you very much. I think this was very fruitful, and hope to continue the discussion. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having stayed here. I would like to invite my distinguished panelists to come on the stage. Thank you for being here. Samuel Mamou is there. Thank you for coming. Magnus von Kram, Hermann Ludwig Möller, und Erin Pöbje. Thank you for being here. Let me say a few words of opening remarks. The previous panel discussed government strategies. We will now approach the issue from the other side, from the perspective of companies. My name is Cécile Boutelet. I'm an economic reporter from France for Le Monde, and I've been correspondent in Germany since 2010, and I've been reporting about new space companies in Germany. The starting point is a growing role of private actors in the space sector. This transformation has a name, new space. SpaceX has become the most visible symbol of this transformation, but the phenomenon is much broader. It means new entrants, lower access, operating costs, faster technological cycles, and more importantly for today's discussion, a switch from large public programs to services, data, and capabilities both on the market. This approach profoundly changes the role of companies. They are no longer only subcontractors in large public programs. They can become operators. Even managers and even owners of critical infrastructure. In Europe, this is no longer only a theoretical shift. It has already started to reshape European policy at the ESA European Space Agency Ministerial Council in Bremen that we mentioned before, November 2025. Member states confirmed major investments in the European Launchers Challenge, a program designed to support several European launch service providers and bring more competition, resilience, and service-oriented procurement into Europe's access to space. In other words, Europe has begun to institutionalize part of the new space logic. This brings us to the central question of this panel. How can Europe make the most of this transformation? Can we build an innovative European space infrastructure through the market, through standards, through public procurement, through cross-border startups, through European industrial alliances? But space is not just another market. It is a strategic, dual-use and sovereignty-sensitive domain. These infrastructures are becoming critical. We said it in the first panel, for defense, communication, navigation, intelligence, climate monitoring, and economic security. This is a challenge we will discuss today, how Europe can unleash the entrepreneurial energy of new space to accelerate innovation and integration without losing political control over infrastructures that have become critical. We will discuss this for 45 minutes and then leave for questions from this audience. So let me now introduce our panelists. Samuel Mamou, you are the director of Alliance New Space France, which represents French space startups, scale-ups, and small and middle enterprises in their relation with the state. Thank you for being here. Magnus von Kram, You are the head of space at BDLE, the German Aerospace Industries Association. Since May 2025, you have been responsible for representing the German space industry vis-à-vis the Bundestag, the federal government, and European institutions. Hermann Ludwig Möller, you are the director of European Space Policy Institute, European think tank dedicated to space policy. Before that, you held senior position as European Space Agency, Copernicus Security, Secure Connectivity. Your background covers telecommunication, public-private partnership, and European institutional architecture. And finally, Erin Puppier, you are Senior Fellow for Space at the IISS, International Institute for Strategy Studies, where you lead the space program, and you are a specialist in space security and international law. Thank you very much for being here. I would like to start with you for the first round. You have 5 minutes, so I could stop you at the end. I would like to frame the discussion with you. You come from France and you are responsible for new space. And that's very interesting because in a country such as France, the major European space nation, where space has historically been closely linked to the state and to defense, has this transformation been easy to accept, and what can bring it to Europe? How do you see the development of new space?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be at the French Embassy in Berlin with this astonishing panel to discuss the French-German collaboration and European new space ecosystem. To answer your question and to clarify how the new space ecosystem is developing in France and in Europe, my point of view is, yeah, for sure, in France, we are legacy player and we have, well, well-established player in the space sector for like past more than 50 years. The difficulty and the struggle was in the 2015, 2020s when the new space ecosystem was developed in Europe and especially in Germany. When some company, especially launchers company, were developed, like ESA or RFA and other companies were developed. And in France, we were looking at our established players. So we got a shift. We got a shift in France made by entrepreneurs that decided to jump on the space ecosystem and to develop their activities. And at first, it's quite difficult. Quite difficult, why? Because at first, well, established player wasn't believing at new space companies. Quite difficult, why? Because the French Space Agency wasn't believing in the new space company at that time. And quite difficult, why? Because you mentioned that earlier, is that, well, can we trust new space companies that are gonna have investment from private capitals that are gonna support our defense strategy? And after this question was asked in France, we got a couple of years to think about it and to decide what we're going to do, because in France we would like to think before acting. And after that, we decided that we need to support the new space ecosystem. And the French government decided to fund and to put a lot of money to support the new space ecosystem. We had already like a lot of startups and SMEs that have been developing and developing their activities. And the quite interesting thing is that these companies decided to develop outside of Europe and outside of France, because it was easier for them to understand the market in the US, because it was already shifted by the new space ecosystem. And in the US company were already agreeing and accepting to get the risk from startup in Europe. So they developed in the US, they developed in Japan, in Korea, and then France decided to support them, and they were able to develop their activities in France and to be involved in some French new space program, some institutional program, and develop their activities. And now we get to the next stage, where we got new space company, we get like scale up right now with already like services and operational capacity with satellite in orbit. And now we're thinking how this capacity could help us for our, for example, next generation Earth observation satellite for our defense military purposes. And we have to think with, on one side, the legacy player, and on the other side, the new space player, to decide, well, which one are we going to use, or how we can complement each other to work together and to get like collaboration between these two ecosystems. And this is the current moment that we have. We are right now in a place where we already have a new space ecosystem established in France. And we're thinking how we can create collaboration between the legacy player and the new space player, but also how can we create collaboration between French player and European player. This is the main point right now, because what we witness in the new space ecosystem in Europe is that all countries decided to support and to develop the new space ecosystem at national level. Why? Because they were looking for having more national industry, and they were looking for having more sovereignty and autonomy in space. And right now we are a shift where we have a lot of new space companies in Europe, and we're thinking how we can make collaboration to go with the idea that it's going to be a French startup or a German startup or a Finnish startup, but it's going to be a European startup. And when we see the example of ISI, for example, in Earth observation, well, we can see that ISI decided to develop in Finland first and then develop their activities in a lot of different countries in Europe. And the way to do it, the way to become European is a key actually to thrive and to develop the new space ecosystem today.
Thank you very much for this answer. I think we will come back to some points you just mentioned. Now I would like to ask the German part. Mr. von Kram, you experience also quite a big shift in Germany. In Germany it may have been approached more. Space may have been approached more at the beginning more as an industrial, scientific issue, and finally commercial theme. And then new space startups were founded 2018. But today we see this change of paradigm. Space is becoming more strategic, more dual use, more closely linked to defense. This means with a much bigger budget. So I would like to ask you, how is Germany industry experiencing this transformation? Can space become for Germany a major strategic industrial sector, creating jobs and value chain the same way as other critical technologies? And how can this shift becoming truly European? Can you answer to Samuel?
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me. I'll try to answer as much of these questions as I can. So, of course, this shift we are experiencing in Germany is massive from a space perspective, from an industry perspective. I mean, it electrified industry, so to say. Everyone is, I guess, very excited. But, of course, there are big challenges for all players involved, because we have a very fixed time frame, so there's not a lot of time. So I would say scaling is at the moment a big challenge that we need to face, and either it be startups, SMEs, or big industry players. I would say at the moment there's, as we can see from the contracts that are being given out, it's being done the usual way. I would say, if you look at Satcom, so there are big players doing the contracts, but so to say, the flood raises us all. Everyone will be involved at some point. And I think, of course, at the moment, Germany is looking to support its own industry and to develop its own industry. But in the end, this is a short time period with a big budget. And in the end, if we can achieve to come to a higher level industry-wise, technological-wise, I think all of Europe can profit from that, because there will be collaborations and there will be partnerships also on new levels, as Samuel said. And so I think the two problems mainly now are scaling, or a challenge, I would say, which we are starting to see with new partnerships and also new development programs in the industry, trying to meet that demand in that time frame. And I think the second one that we are not looking at so much, because there are now these massive institutional budgets, but where we're still lacking in Europe massively, is of course the venture capital market, and to get outside capital, not just from the government, but outside of it. And few weeks ago that, or the discussion is still going on about pension funds in Germany and how we will pay for pensions. In the US, it's very normal that pension funds invest in venture capital and high-risk areas, high technological areas, including space. So I think that's really something we should look at in Europe and also in Germany, especially to get more investment into that area. But going to your last question, I think in the end it will be European. We have a big budget now, and the government is looking to support, so to say, the national industry. But space is so interlinked, especially in Europe, that it's impossible that it will be primarily and only nationalistic. And so I think in the end, and also long term, after 2030, everyone will profit from that development.
The best are going to survive any, whatever the nationality?
Yes, possibly. But as I said, the flood raises us all. I think everyone will profit in some way. And there will be players that will become bigger than they have been before. You will have new players that will become bigger, going from startup to SME or even beyond that. But there we have also the difficulty at the moment that in terms of against financing, Germany or Europe is very good at the first stage financing, but afterwards to get an SME or small player to become a big player, we still lag there behind.
Thank you very much, Mr. Müller. So it's your turn. I think you have already many things to say. Can you give us the European perspective? If you take seriously what Samuel Mamou and Magnus von Kram have just said, the question becomes European. Are our institutions adapted to a space sector that is faster, more commercial, more dual use, and more competitive?
It would be amazing if the answer would just be yes, because there's such a scale of change and speed of change that I think everybody needs to change, including institutions, for sure. There's a lot of technical expertise in the system. I think this is good. There are operational programs. That is good. I think there are approaches like take the Launcher Challenge, where there is a new mechanism of giving contracts that help to raise venture capital. It's an important point. Many of these elements exist. Some of them are more recent. I think they will appear more frequently. And as much as for industry to scale up a production, I think we need to scale up as a whole, including the budget that we can raise in politics across Europe. If you take SpaceX IPO coming up, talk is about 60 to 80 billion they may raise. This is 10 times the annual budget of ESA in a single company in one country. So I think we have the challenge to scale up in all respect on a scale that we are not used to. Today we are at a GDP of 0.07 or so. Maybe it's a bit more, which is very, very low compared to the US factor 5 or factor 15 if you compare to what is institutional investments cross-Atlantic in security and space. We have only 10% today on venture capital in Europe. I think this is a number that we also need to double. I would argue the institutional side, and ESA has done a first step, and we hope for the MFF equally coming up. We need to continue to rise this budget to 0.15 GDP to make any scalable effect, and in parallel to also scale up. That's not startup anymore, that is scale up. And you got my notes, so you said exactly the points that I would have underlined. Also by a factor of 2 at least, which means 20% of that money. So ultimately, the institutions, together with industry, also industry co-invest, but also market co-invest, I think we should aim at, it's very unromantic to talk about budget, but I think we need to reach the order of 50 billion per year, which is a significant step up. If we do not do that, there's a true risk to be completely outscaled, what we see already now.
Public or private?
Combined. And I said 20% should be private and 80% should be institutional.
Why? Can you explain that number?
Well, it's an extrapolation of what we see today. Today, across the planet, 85%, if not more, are public money, also in the US. The Pentagon money budget just exceeded the NASA budget. So there is a lot of public money in the system anyhow. But what really drives the change, if you take Elon Musk, he had contracts, I think it is 4 billion or so, for cargo and crew to the space station. This is institutional contracting. But with that money, he could raise the money on the market to invest in Falcon 9, to invest into Starlink, and to invest into Starship and turn the whole story upside down. So you need that mix, and you cannot escape the public responsibility to drive this. This will not change tomorrow, even if we all talk about commercialization, but you need the energy of the venture capital and the entrepreneurs. And if we get from 10% to 20%, this is a big change. And also in the US, this is what really drove the change. Elon Musk is not Boeing.
Can you just say a word about what happened during this ESA Ministerial Council to Bremen? How do you describe the shift, what happened there? Was it a momentum for Europe?
Well, this is thanks to the US. It is thanks to the Munich Security Conference and the speech by a vice president. Yes, it is, in the sense that Europe realized, and it's not specific for space, that we need to take care of ourselves. So the one word that hasn't been used yet, which is on my notes, which you couldn't see, is sovereignty. So I think the driving argument for the public side to raise that money, which is not an easy sell normally, which would not have worked a year or two ago, is sovereignty. And I think we have an interest to put a narrative in the policy sphere to make this understood. And we missed this in the age of the internet. We missed it in the age of the semiconductors. We are missing it in the AI. And I would like to be positive, still optimistic, that in space there is a window.
So you see at the window. You are telling us we should stay optimistic in space.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Erin Papier, many thanks. To conclude this first round, I would like to ask you to take a step back from what we just have heard. If private company are going to get more space, more importance, getting to become critical for European security, can we still consider them as purely commercial actors? Where should we draw the line between entrepreneurial freedom, commercial responsibility, and political control of such a dual-use domain?
Okay, thank you for the interesting question. When it comes to the characterization of commercial space actors who provide these dual use, so military and civilian applications, or whose systems or services underpin critical infrastructure, I think it's interesting to ask what is different about space? Because this is, of course, something that already happens in many other domains. And there is a clear answer. There are two key differences with the space domain when it comes to dual-use capabilities and commercial entities. The first that we heard about a lot in the previous panel is the orbital context. We've heard that space is becoming increasingly congested, competitive, and it's a contested environment with geopolitical tensions on Earth also playing out in the domain of outer space. So this is an environment that companies are operating in, which is a strategic domain without borders. So this is the first difference. And the second is that the legal framework is different in space. And this has consequences for the way that companies have their relationship with the state at the international level. So unlike on Earth, in space, because of the Outer Space Treaty, the actions of commercial actors become considered the actions of the state itself. So a state becomes responsible at the international level for the actions of the space activities of commercial actors. What implications does this have for security? There are two key risks as I see it. The first relates to unintentional risk. So we heard before mentioned in-orbit servicing and proximity operations. So space objects that can maneuver close to other satellites. This can be useful for in-orbit servicing, refueling, debris mitigation, etc. But it can also be weaponized. And so when a commercial actor is carrying out these services, even if it's for a benign purpose, there is a risk of misperception, leading to miscalculation and unintended escalation. This is the first risk. The second risk relates to deliberate targeting. If a commercial actor is providing dual-use capabilities, then they are presenting themselves as a military target during armed conflict. And Russia has already demonstrated that it's willing to target commercial actors in the context of its war against Ukraine. So we have the attack on Viasat at the start of its invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. We have the Luch 2 tracking of Intelsat satellites used by the Bundeswehr. And then thirdly, and probably most concerningly, we also heard in the previous panel about assessments that Russia may be preparing to place nuclear weapons in outer space. That's a security risk also for commercial actors because the detonation of a thermonuclear device in low Earth orbit is probably going to indiscriminately destroy thousands of commercial satellites. So these are risks that are confronted by both companies and also by their governments in space. So there needs to be an awareness of these risks and steps taken to mitigate them.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I will now ask three main questions after this first round to go deeper. First question that I have, can new space be a driver or European space integration? I would like to start again from an example. We now see companies that are no longer strictly national. Maybe they are not seen as well from international perspective, but still, they develop within ecosystems that combine several nationalities, several sites, several investors, and several markets. And I've been reporting about two startups or scale-ups. You mentioned it, ESA Aerospace and the Exploration Company. They are fascinating. I've been reporting about both in Munich. ESA has been funded by an Austrian, Daniel Metzler, co-led by a French executive, Alexander Dallonneau. The Exploration Company has been funded by a French woman, Hélène Houby. The board is international. I asking myself, can this bottom-up Europeanization become a model for the European space sector? Do you want to answer? Yeah.
Sure. So first of all, I think this is not something new, especially in the space sector. I used to work for Ariane Group, which is also, of course, part of Airbus, and it's already a deeply European company with French and German sites. Even OHB, or if you look at others, Thales has sites in Germany, OHB has sites in Italy, and so on. So I think this is not something mutually exclusive to a so-called new space, but this is just something that is common in the European space sector. But of course, we have new companies like Exploration Company, Atmos, and others that already thinking European. I think this is also, of course, an investing approach because they know there will be European programs which will have high investments. They know there's now huge budgets coming from Germany. So I think that's usually the way where the money goes. So I think they have to think European to get everything that's going on.
Samuel Mamou.
The answer to your question is yes. I think the new space can help this European integration. As Magnus said, it was already the case before, but maybe it was a different case because at that time, but the state was involved, and it was like companies with like investment, public investment in the capital of the company, and it was diplomatic relationship to decide where the site will be and how we're gonna develop this. This is kind of the same case, but with a commercial perspective on this way. Because right now, when we have like a French startup or a German startup, when they decide to develop their activities in the other country, yes, for sure, they're looking for the money and they know that they will have money over there. But they also look for like workforce, because we have a great workforce in Europe and we have like expertise in every single country in Europe, thanks to ESA and thanks to all the development we made for the past 60 years. Apart from that, when we are developing this commercial infrastructure, we're really thinking about how we could be European champion and how we could be global champion and leaders in our domain. So we're going to look at how we can develop and expand our business in this way. And to do this, there is like many ways to do it, to be honest. There is one way will be to just partner with another company and like having a great partnership between a French company and a German company, for example. Second option will be to establish in another country. So when we think about the exploration company, for example, they're like established in France and in Germany with like high activities and high volume activities. The third option will be to buy a company, and we can see that happening more and more. We're starting to have buying of European company. Well, a French company is going to buy a Polish company or Luxembourg company and going to establish in that country with having a new footprint in their country. And the last part, which is the most important and that we didn't have at that time before, or we had a different way, is the private investment. Magnus talked about VC and talked about the difficulty about having European VC investing in the new space ecosystem in Europe. But with VC from all over Europe and actually from all over the world, we can really develop this European footprint. Because if we have a French company with German VC on it, Finnish VC, and like Polish VC as well, we can really develop a European model to develop a company.
So, Mala, do you believe in that? We ask a question in the first round. Does European sovereignty mean one single European champion or many European champions, or rather a resilient, competitive and interoperable European ecosystem? How do you see that?
Yeah, I think it's never good to put all your money on one bet. That is probably the opposite of being resilient. That includes Starlink over Ukraine, also a single dependency even for the US government. I don't think this is even a model that the US wants. And if they play Amazon and Musk now, there are certainly reasons for that. So the answer is very clear. We should not just have one champion. We should have champions. We should have a clever policy that gives people that have a reputation, have a trust in the system that some may call legacy, but they are established actors that today define the industry. For sure, they have a space in that future industry, but we should also at the same time diversify across the sizes of industry and across countries. And what you just said, Europe has a built-in resilient system. Some people say it's inefficient, but the fact that money flows in different governments, the fact that Spain stepped up now, Poland is stepping up, Germany stepped up, that's only good. If it was one country and that country changes government tomorrow, that's another enormous dependency. You do not want this. This is a weakness, if you want, of the US almost, because as much as you do not want an industrial monopoly, you do not want a decision-making that can be black and white in one single place. And I think the beauty of Europe is really that you have all these different actors. And the good news, and to come back to your question on the ESA ministerial, the good news is if you look at the curves of every country and their investments, that pretty much everybody goes up. And so it is not only Germany that stepped up a lot and France that has been there all the time, it is also others. We need to take the UK with us. I think we have all the interest to not end up in an EU perimeter. EU is a strong economy, it has a strong industrial base, it has a lot of venture capital. But I think this idea of, to come back to your original question, can the startup scene help this? Absolutely, yes.
So you don't see the risk of fragmentation. So that's not something we should too much worry about.
You know, in an ideal world, you make a master plan and you say, you do that and you do that and you do this. Nature does not work like this. Nature has some principles. Not everybody will survive. This is also part of risk and competition. There has been an overemphasis in previous years, and it still exists when people say we should not overlap in what we do. If you do not overlap, then there is no competition. Competition only exists if you work in the same domain. So it is a balance between not doing everything 3 times in all places and a perfect system where there is no overlap and no competition. So competition is good. It is good. You have multiple launcher companies in different countries and they try their luck. Some have already gone out and others will. But I think this is really the ingredient that is absolutely needed. And the word fragmentation, which is used a lot and maybe too much. Our answer to this word, it is a point. I'm not saying that it's not a point. But what we like to say is it takes a village. It takes the nations, it takes the ESA mechanisms, it takes the EU space programs, it takes a private initiative of industry, entrepreneurs and finance markets. And they will never be in a perfect orchestration. And if we would want to sit down to have the perfect governance, very European, we try to have the perfect mapping of who does what. If I was a secret service of another nation, this is what I would recommend to the Germans or the Europeans to do. Sit down and sort out all the imperfections and fragmentations. And while you do this, you will not disturb me with anything that you deliver in space.
Good, thank you. I would like to ask a question about procurement. We're talking about a revolution, so you just describe it. And that means the state as a buyer, not only as architect. So the major disruption of new space may be as much commercial as technological. The state no longer controls the whole chain, as I said, by services, data, and capabilities. Just a question, is every single state ready to move from a logic of large sovereign programs to a logic of buying capabilities? From France, Samuel, tell us if it's working.
I think it's a balance. I think we need actually that it's balanced, because if we keep going on only like public procurement and very national public program, we're not going to be competitive. We're not going to be on the global market, so we won't need to be more innovative in that contract, and it's going to cost a lot. If we go on the opposite way, and if we go full commercial, we're going to depend from private actors for everything. And if they are like not French, for example, if like from outside Europe, partners, if they are private companies, we won't control them and they can stop their activities. And we saw that in the war in Iran a couple of months ago, when some Earth observation companies stopped delivering some data to European countries. What we need to find is a balance between what we need to keep at a sovereign level and what we need to keep with the national public ownership, and what we can get to private companies. And I think, for example, if we take Earth observation, well, France and military will still need to have national capacity and public capacity, because they will need to have their own asset and they don't want private companies to know everything they're going to do. But if they want to invest to have as much data as they want, it's going to cost so much and they won't be able to support it. So the idea is to keep 1 or 2 assets that will be public owned and to keep the rest from like private companies, because they will have like resiliency. As Ludwig said earlier, we will need to have multiple companies to have this resiliency. And if we go beyond what we're talking about when we're talking about resiliency, is to say that, well, if you have only 2 assets that are public owned, if we lose one for any reason, hostile or like just damage coming up in an accident, well, we won't only have one only asset. Or if we are providing some data from like private company, we can keep going on having our Earth observation data and we can keep our resiliency. This is the main focus I really think we have.
Okay, I just have a question. So you followed from the very beginning these new space companies, French new space companies, in a adverse environments. So I'm curious, how did they develop? How they found themselves at the beginning? And what is the situation right now? How did it change? And how do you want it to change more in the future? How do you see that?
So if we take the Earth observation market, for example, which is one of the biggest markets when we have also as well as private market and public markets, dual use market with civil and commercial, we can give the same to communication, but if we start with Earth observation, we have company like, for example, if I give an example of Hertie Labs, which is a French startup with more than 20 satellites in orbit doing like maritime surveillance. Well, they develop more of their business outside of Europe at first. So they invest with private money and they get to every overseas country, like in Japan, in all South Asia, to develop their activities in their business. And then they get back to France and they get back to the military by saying, okay, we have a product, we have a services, we can sell it to you, we have the data. And they start buying the data from private companies.
Interesting.
And this is all we need to think, and this is why there is a key action right now in Europe about public procurement. And Ludwig talked about it earlier by saying we need more money. But beyond having more money, we need to use the money differently. And I think this is one of the ideas Ludwig wanted to highlight as well, but we need to be sure that this money will be invested in a good way with the public procurement supporting the commercial development of the space ecosystem.
It's perfect for my next question for you, Germany. So much money right now. You have the possibility to fund everything you want. But is it not a problem in this case? So you will fund on the wrong places, or the startup or scale up are not willing to be as quick as possible, to be or as good as possible because they benefit from this huge amount of money?
I think in parts, of course, because if the government is involved and huge sums of money are involved, mistakes are prone to happen. But as we looked at the new space security strategy, which came out end of last year, we see that there's a proper plan with proper targets, which the industry looked at, which institutions looked at. Ms. Nötzold said it before. We are all quite happy about it at the moment. I mean, we're of course we're not wise. We don't know if in 10 years we look back and we say, oh, we should have done something differently. But in the end, I think there's no alternative at the moment. And I think the plan is good. We know what we want because it already exists. Unfortunately, not in Europe, but in other places. So we know what we need. And in that sense, we can
be more precise, please. How do you ensure that the money will get on the right place? Do you have a strategy for that to avoid the risk that that's something?
But I don't, and thankfully I don't have to make that decision because I'm on that industry side. That's for the government to do it, and the way they're doing it now, of course, is, as I said before, the usual way because they know how to do it and to give big contracts to big players. But that's, of course, the problem with the time frame we have. We need to be fast, and it's a high security risk, so we cannot play around, so to say, with that money. And I think it's a conservative way, but probably it's for that certain area, in that security sense, and that geopolitical issue we have at the moment, it's probably the right way.
Okay. A question to you, Herman, and then we'll go back to you, Erin. I just wanted to ask if you see a blueprint, a good way to invest that money, the best way possible that Europe combine performance, speed, and sovereignty. How do you see that? How do you what kind of counsel you will give to the government right now?
If I had that blueprint, I could run a nice company, for sure. I think there is no blueprint as such. Maybe it's also the nature of what we see, that this is not a blueprint situation. It's the scale and rate of change is just unseen. We're not used to that. The 35 billion, this is equivalent of an ESA budget. Yeah, this is enormous numbers. I think what we should do, and we just had two interesting remarks before. One was that people sell their products internationally. There are companies, Aurora Tech, we didn't talk about, they do fire detection, infrared sensors, and they can be used also in security. They don't even talk to lots of institutional people in Europe. They have a business, they produce, they sell. That's a running model where somebody, an entrepreneur, and you see this increasingly, ISA is another case. ISA developed a product and they go. They do not have a blueprint from a government to do that. This is entrepreneurial. Yeah. So this is in that fabric, and I think this we need absolutely to support. It's extremely important. What I would wish is that also the bigger industries, they would not just say, I'm on the industry side, so I receive a contract. I think the industry has to also have an own strategy to see how can I leverage this to not only respond to a contract, but to use it as a catalyst to produce products I can scale. Because otherwise, there are two scenarios. One, once the 35 billion are spent, there's a reset button and you have a new round of 35 billion, you continue the same way. You need to be rich. It doesn't really work in Russia. And I'm not sure it can really work anywhere. So what you want is you want to use that unique time window and enormous amount of money to also leverage what is a wider market. In the panel before, interesting, direct-to-device was mentioned. Direct-to-device is on your phone. That is not just a security message. This is a capability. This is why Elon Musk spent 17 billion on frequency rights. This is a typical outscaler. Yeah, this is what in the past space was for TV broadcasting. All this industry we have today, without TV broadcasting and Premier League, or I don't know at the time what it was called, a lot of this would not exist. Now, you will see direct-to-device and maybe data centers in space and a few things where a lot of stuff will define the digital economy of space. And our industry here, the established one and the new one, they need to find a path, and the policy needs to help them to also be part of this. Otherwise, public pays permanently.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Erin, I would like to ask you about the limits of this new approach. I mean, when we are talking about startups, we are talking, for example, about, non-European capital, suppliers, component, cloud service, acquisition, partnerships. Should we control more closely this aspect? How would you see as a limit for this company-driven approach?
So as I understand it, your question goes to this tension between sovereignty and the agility and innovation that industry offer. So in that sense, we've already heard some examples where private companies reduced or restricted their services, their space-based services, probably at the behest of their own government. So this is an area where governments can continue to exercise control over their companies. Under the Outer Space Treaty and national space laws, governments authorize and continually supervise the companies under their control or from whose territory they launch. And when it comes to licensing, governments can attach certain requirements to the companies so that in a situation where national security makes it necessary, it can require the company to stop its services. So this is one way for countries to maintain this kind of control. It also speaks in favor of using companies or reducing dependency on companies who are based in other jurisdictions, because we saw the example with Starlink and the withdrawal of access to services during the conflict in Ukraine. So reducing these kind of external dependencies is also a way of maintaining control and ensuring sovereignty.
Samuel Mamu and Magnus von Kramp, how do you react to that? There is a tension between this security requirement. Are they compatible with entrepreneurial agility and scaling up? How do you see this problem of sovereignty and keeping control over those startups? Even in financing, we know that we are lacking of investment funds. Many companies has to raise money from outside. Is it a risk? How would you see that?
I would say it's a big risk, especially for new companies, new players, because this whole security issue and the whole security detail they have to do to produce this kind of technology is new to them, and they will get used to it. But I think it's a prime example how experienced system players and new players can cooperate to do something new and exciting, because the new players obviously they need the experience from the old players how to do this security business and this security technology, and I think they can learn a lot from each other in that way.
Yeah, I will agree with what Magnus said about the complementarity and the collaboration that we could have with these two players. One other fact will be also that we need to really evaluate the risk and evaluate what we have at the end. So if we stop risking that kind of stuff and if we stop risking that kind of innovation, well, we won't have anything at the end. So we need to take the risk, but still we need to assess the risk and to limit that risk. In another way, if we're talking about the private investment, for example, well, we know that we don't have the money in Europe to fund every new space company. We know that we'll have some money outside of Europe, and if we talk a single country, we'll have money outside of that country. We need to think, well, what are the country where we ally, which is the country we partners, and what's the limit we can give to a new space company, for example, by saying, well, we need to not go beyond 10% of the private capital that will be given by an outside European players. And after assessing that risk, we need to keep going that, well, we cannot depend to only one player. And this is a discussion we got earlier with Erin, but also with Ludwig about, well, we need to have multiple players. And to get this, after getting this risk assessment, we can have a solution by saying, okay, we're not depending on one only private player, but we're going to have 2, 3, or 4 or 5 European players that we're going to depend on, that make sure that if one is losing, if one is stopping activities, if one is depending from an outside European countries, well, we're keeping the 2 others or 3 others.
Thank you. Herman, Ludwig, do you have a reaction to that? Do we need a common European framework to address those risks, or will states necessarily keep control over this issue?
If it comes to a framework that facilitates scale-up funding, absolutely yes. It doesn't mean that it has to be an EU-based fund, but I think we need to talk between nations how we can match an increasing public funding with increasing private funding. If I take the case of France, France today, the venture capital is about 90% French. In Germany, it's in the 60%. So already you have a different, actually it's foreign. Germany has, I think, more than 30% non-European money in these funds, which is interesting. So there's already a different mindset how you actually protect yourself when it comes to foreign investment in companies. We had the case of Mineric that was even sold. I mean, this is almost unbelievable. I think this is a big mistake. I could say something on Planet, which is a different case. But I think we need to have an approach in Europe when it comes to sovereignty that also looks at ownership and also on the money sources. Germany is a special case right now because there's such a steep increase on the public money. I have not heard yet, but I don't live here, that people say, so how do we manage to scale up the private side of this? Because if you did this, you need to multiply by 5. Today, Germany, interestingly enough, Europe-wide, last year was the biggest venture capital investor. The biggest money was in Germany, companies like ISA and a few others. But now we have a big step up with the 35 billion. So you need to multiply by 5. Who does that? If you do not do it, the signal you said, this is a classical model of public procurement, and then you may miss the catalytic effect. And at the end of our talk, this will be one of my points, really, to make sure that we use this money as a catalyst for market development and raising private money.
Very good. Thank you very much. Erin, the last word, if you want, before I open to the audience, the question to the audience. If you had the question, if you have one idea to improve the German, Franco-German or European cooperation in space, what would you do? But you can answer as you want.
Yeah, well, actually, the IISS published a report on advancing European military capacity in space earlier this year. It wasn't focusing only on German-Franco relations, but looking more broadly on mapping where the dependencies lie within Europe. So where does Europe depend on US space capabilities? And what are the existing plans for reducing these dependencies or strengthening the capabilities? And what more could be done? So there we set out 3 different approaches, but I think what we heard today about increasing dialogue between these different actors is already a good step forward, because not that long ago, I think it wasn't so widely understood, although it was signaled in the national security strategy that Germany had certain ambitions or intentions about the role that it would like to play in the European security architecture. So communicating this more openly with partners and coming to an arrangement or understanding about the role that each player can take within Europe is already a good step forward that today is a part of.
Thank you very much. Do you have a final word for the Franco-German relationship, or I open to the audience? Okay, let's start with a question. I see some hands. I will collect a few questions before. So I see 2. It's hard to distinguish who is. Oh yeah, okay, here, and I see another question here in the middle.
Hello. Hello. Spokesperson of the Greens for Science, Technology and Space in the Bundestag. And I was wondering, many of the questions you discussed are currently also discussed in Brussels, and like the EU Space Act is on the table. So I was wondering, what kind of role do you see for the European Union in all of this, especially in a Europeanization and a market creation for the space sector?
There was another question. Yeah, here in the middle.
What I found interesting, also related to the conversation that we had before, is that there was a lot of openness and willingness to include US suppliers in constructing this European architecture. And combined with what we heard about the capability gap and the urgent timelines, it seems like the short to medium term is looking towards including US space companies. And so my question would be more to Magnus von Kram and Samuel Mamou. How is that perceived in the industry, that we have catastrophes like the Manaric Rocket Lab deal, but also, you know, on the other hand, strong localization from US companies in European ecosystem? So there's a long-term strategy behind it and an investment. They see the money, they have the capabilities, especially when we look into offensive capabilities. And I would be interested in hearing your thoughts. What do you perceive? What is the current conversations in the industry about that, especially with the smaller players? Thank you.
Maybe I can answer both questions. I start with yours. So it's perceived, and to be honest, it was a surprise to us, because Germany has become, in that sense, a little bit more French with the new budget, because they're looking more internally to invest that money as much as they can and as much as as we as industry can provide the technology that is needed. And of course, there are gaps, and considering the time frame, you can be sure that there will be certain technologies that we have to buy abroad. We as association are also feeling the pull from US companies trying to get a foothold in Germany, also from other European countries, to be frank. But of course, that's easier and also looked at in a different way than if it's abroad, outside of Europe. But it's an issue on another level also, because we're saying if you're spending 35 billion, you cannot just expect to just buy stuff. You have to be industrial. You have to think industrial. You have to make industrial policy. And part of that would be that you don't just buy stuff, but you also elevate the industry to develop new technologies so that we don't have to buy it abroad when these 5 years are over, so afterwards. So that would be my answer to that. Your answer concerning Brussels, I think just looking at the MFF and the sums that are possibly, hopefully, going to be invested from European side, of course, it makes a huge difference, and everyone is looking at Brussels and how they will spend their money, especially in space. But we have to see how that goes. As you know, in Germany, the European Space Act is kind of looked at in a not too positive light. For us association, we are sure that it's good that we have a common framework, but as it is now, we're not too happy about it, but that's an ongoing discussion in Brussels. But to answer it shortly, yes, Brussels is super important and it's taken into consideration at all levels.
Thank you for both questions. Maybe comment on Brussels to start. What Brussels should do? Well, we were talking about it earlier, but it's public procurement. And I think this is what the Commission should be doing, either for like Earth observation, connectivity, launchers in every single domain of space. European Commission has some needs, and European Commission can also aggregate the need of its member states. And I think public procurement, in a way that we talked earlier, that public procurement as a catalyst to develop the commercialization of the space sector is key. And this is where we're looking for Brussels as an industry perspective. And then the other question on US dependency and US development in Europe, US companies development in Europe, maybe two things. First, we have to admit that we don't have all the technology and we don't have all the assets right now in Europe. And the thing is to think about a long-term strategy, as Magnus said, by saying, okay, well, short term, we don't have anything in Europe. So what we can do, should we keep being blind or should we buy any capacity outside of Europe? And I think this is the first shift that we need to think, but we need to be very careful when we get to that shift, because this is the best way to be actually dependent from outside Europe capacity. So we really need, when we accept to make that kind of decision, to say, okay, we're going to have dependency from outside of Europe, but we're going to develop and get a long-term strategy to get this capacity in Europe. This is the first stage when we're really going to depend from outside capacity. The other stage is when we're going to have like US companies that are going to be establishing in Europe and going to develop their activities. Well, we need to think also how this footprint is going to be developed in Europe and in our country. I think like US company developing in Europe is not a new thing. It has been happening for like past 60 years, even for military purposes. So this can be the case. We just need to think quite about it, and we need to decide what our strategy about what we want to keep at national scale and what we can agree to have with like partners over Europe and outside Europe.
If I can add on the first question on the role of the EU, I think what the EU right now does on operational programs, Galileo, Copernicus, and others to come, is excellent. I think we need this European ownership of requirements and representing Europe as a customer to these solutions, and also raising the money to develop and operate this. This is in a way a no-brainer, and we should do more of this for sure. Now, will there be much more in the next MFF? There was 130 billion in the discussion, which is shared between defense and space. My guess is it will not be more than 30 to 40 billion out of this, so it will not be a dramatic change. And today, let's keep in mind, 80% of the money is in the nations. in particular in France and in Germany and others. So if I would have to put my money somewhere in terms of where do I see the dynamics, I think it is still more in the nations. That does not mean that we also want to have more in Brussels. You mentioned the Space Act, I think. Yeah, it is a bit of a tricky thing because I believe it has too much of a branding now of debris and safety and constraints, and it's a cost issue. There is an argument that these things are needed, not a question, but I think it did not transmit the market creation effect that you should have with these undertakings. To give 2 examples, you can use it for preference clause. I think this is a big point we should discuss. I think we should have a preference for our own industry solutions. And the same is true for market access. I think you should not allow everybody to do all the services all around. I think we need to learn to be a bit more sovereign also on this. And the second point on the US, well, it has been said, it is inevitable that we will have procurements that include US solutions. The mistake would be, and there is a risk, that we do not do the program for the future at the same time. That you say, I have a capability, okay, and I accept the dependency, but I do not develop my own industry. And sometimes, if you have too many US companies settling down in Berlin and in Luxembourg and elsewhere, that is not a good sign for your European industry. That is not the message. It's not a good political message you give. You need to do to some extent, probably it's a reality of the planet, but you need to be careful.
How would you do? Are you careful? So communicative. What do you say?
Well, it's not just a matter of communication, not to do too much of that. I think you should be very selective. You should really have there's scrutiny on foreign direct investments. There's a whole mechanism of this. I think there should be mechanisms that looks into if a foreign company establishes important facilities in Europe, is it something we want? What dependency comes with it? And I'm not sure this is always happening. And I come back to the case of Mineric, where it's not even a company, we sell a key capability of Europe into foreign control. Those are major mistakes. I think we need to learn to be more sovereign on this. And here we are in a French-German setting. I think the French, they have this much more in their DNA, if I may say. There's much more awareness and acceptance to think in this way. Germany will get there, but I think they are not there yet. And part of getting closer together is also a better common understanding on that.
There's still this contradiction between market and sovereignty. So you have to find a path.
Yes, and I think the point was made here. It is a complex thing, but I think I would cut it in 2 pieces. First of all, you need to have a sovereign approach. You need to say, I'm ready to invest money to raise new industries also, or to raise macro existing industries. And I do this for sovereign reasons, and it has a cost attached to it. And I do this with public money. At the same time, I need to say, if I do this, I expect from industry that you put in a share. And I want capital markets to also leverage what ISAR and others are doing already, and to scale this up. But the sequence is you start with the sovereignty to be the catalyst for more.
Yeah, thank you. I would just add a little more on the EU Space Act, as it was mentioned a few times. We've spoken a lot about fragmentation of space systems and services, focusing a lot on fragmentation when it comes to physical infrastructure or digital infrastructure of space. And I would also just like to point out that fragmentation also occurs in terms of regulatory frameworks. So there is a fragmentation of licensing requirements, liability insurance, etc., across borders within Europe. So one of the objectives, or perhaps the main objective of this EU Space Act, is for harmonization of all of these rules. And while aspects of the draft act are problematic and have been critiqued by industry as well as by external actors who would also like to offer services within the European market, like US providers, there is a benefit also to new space actors because of the legal certainty that would be provided. So it's good for companies when the operating environment is characterized by certainty of regulation, certainty in terms of investment, and so on. And so this is a key advantage of harmonizing rules within Europe. Adding to that, there are also advantages more broadly of ensuring a safe operating environment for all space actors, not only new space. And we've talked already about the risks in terms of accidental collision or conjunction in space, also the risks that could happen due to misperception and miscalculation in space. All of these things point to the need for having common standards and shared rules about what is responsible behavior in space. And we've spoken a lot about this domain in terms of its emergent potential. This is a really key moment that we have to seize in terms of establishing our own national or European space ecosystems. But it's also an emerging moment when it comes to the normative framework. The rules are now being developed, although some already exist. It's not a Wild West legally. There are rules that are being developed that will shape how industry acts in space and place some limitations on their behavior. And yet I think there is still a greater potential for industry to play a more active role in shaping these rules and being engaged in establishing standards of conduct and norms of responsible behavior, not only at the domestic level and at the European level, but also internationally.
Thank you very much. I see one other question here on the right side. We will take two questions, and that will maybe be our final round.
Yeah, thank you so much. With the introduction of private actors, right, we do run into the risk of having an Altman on our hands or an Elon Musk on our hands, right? Because they're, I mean, not really the upkeepers of moral rectitude or anything like that. So we've already seen how the AI systems have gone rogue and et cetera, and the previous session, we did see an analogy of how it was earlier a workshop, but right now it needs a vertical integration. So if you look at AI to be some sort of an analogy, we see that we have this humongous, enormous AI on our hands, but very little legal implications where anybody at all is being penalized. So similarly, if US is always going to operate at a very audacious, almost acting without any sort of impunity or acting with impunity sort of scale, Europe in the background of even the Draghi report, where it needs to make all of these normative decisions about what is really responsible behavior on space. And only if Europe is operating on that framework and US isn't, Russia isn't, or even China isn't, how do you see the repercussions play out?
Thank you. We'll take maybe a second question. Or maybe you want to start to answer about, yeah, okay, no.
First of all, thank you. It was already kind of touched upon, but I wanted to ask more on the international governance and the effect that has on the role of the private actors in space, because as you're all well aware of, the international governance is still quite in an intergovernmental logic and is based on principles around the Outer Space Treaty and everything that are based on a very national idea of space activity. So I was wondering whether initiatives like the Artemis Accords, which are kind of trying to change that and to better reflect a larger role of the private sector, and also further initiatives building on that, could help private sector enterprises in space, or if right now if right now these international rules are not really the main factor restraining space. And then also if you were to see, or if you thought that having a larger or better reflection of privatization in space in the international governance, would you like to see more supra-governmental rules or a better, more concrete international mechanism for governing space, or less restrictions or more private responsibility and less government responsibility when acting in space? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that really good question, which is really about the role of private actors in the international legal framework. So as you point out, not only in space, but in other areas of international law, the rules are agreed by states and they bind other states usually, or they bind themselves and other states. This is also the case in outer space. So the Outer Space Treaty is an agreement between states, creating obligations for states to each other. What the mechanism for binding private actors like companies is through Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty, so that the appropriate state, in many cases a launching state, is responsible for the actions, the national space activities of its companies, and therefore it implements this through having rules nationally about authorization, licensing, etc. So this is the mechanism. So far, the negotiations which are taking place to establish new standards or clarify standards at the international level are also reflecting this dynamic. They're between states. So at Vienna, at the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, also in Geneva on the open-ended working group on the prevention of an arms race in outer space in all its aspects. But as I mentioned before, the rules that are being developed do impact commercial actors. The majority of satellites, of course, are commercial satellites. This trend will only intensify. And therefore, I think it is important that there are industry mechanisms developed where industry and individual companies can have a voice. Currently, of course, companies can lobby to their own national delegations, which would then input into these international negotiations. Other possibilities are at the national level to try to have input in stakeholder consultations. In the United Kingdom, there is a good example of a regulatory sandbox for rendezvous and proximity operations, where certain commercial operators have input into shaping upcoming regulations. You mentioned the Artemis Accords. So rather than being something that's directed at the private sector directly, this is more about allowing states, trying to shape the interpretation of the Outer Space Treaty to allow commercial exploitation of natural resources in space, probably including by the private sector. So there are initiatives which seek to benefit or facilitate the private sector, which can include new space. But so far, the structure of international law, as you point out, is interstate. And because this is an area, particularly where commercial interests are deeply affected, and it's a new area where new rules are being established, I think it's all the more important for industry to enter into conversations with their own government and also engage with processes such as, or events like the International Space Summit that was mentioned in Paris, to have representatives present where these rules are being discussed.
Just one word. ITU is a mechanism that includes industry, and I think we will increasingly see discussions that maybe in the past did not happen there, that will happen there, and it works in other domains. So I think there are mechanisms that can carry it forward. It was mentioned also before that after the summit there is maybe then a pickup on UN and ITU as a specific example. So there are mechanisms for that, and I think we have an interest to have the private side in these debates.
How do you see that on the side of industry?
I would also just add maybe one point. So the European way is different in that way, and also going to your question, that we have this kind of lawlessness from other nations there. I think it's good that we have a European way where we have ethical questions about this, but I would also that we also have to consider that we are as Europe not alone in the world, and we tend to, as we see as the European Space Act, sometimes overcomplicate things and then so to call shoot us in the foot because we have to compete globally and not just within Europe. So I think that's always something we have to keep in mind. But that being said, of course, I think the European way is the right way, that we have these kind of questions and that we address them. But of course, we have to find a middle way, so to say.
Samuel, I see you nodding.
Yeah, agreeing on what you just said. One other thing I want to add is that France has maybe one of the stricter regulation in space over the world, and at least in Europe, and for more than 20 years. So as an industry, we had to comply with this regulation for more than 20 years, and we had to directly add this legislation in our developments, which is not the case for other European countries where they had to know other regulation after developing their business, which is quite different right now. What we can see in France that can be like seen as an advantage actually to already have a framework, because we can have more clarity and visibility about what the activity is going to be tomorrow. If we're talking about the UK, for example, with the sandbox on in-orbit servicing, well, it gives us clarity that we can do some stuff and we can invest as a private investor. We can put money in there because the state's not going to, from one day to the other, just stop everything. It told us that we can work in this topic, we can try some stuff, and tomorrow, in 5 or 10 years, we will have more stringent rules. And this is why rules sometimes can be helpful to framework a sector, but we don't need to go over the rules and to overcomplicate the rules. That's why we need to find a balance in that. And I think the European perspective can be tricky right now with the EU Space Act in discussion. But I also think, to answer your question, is that otherwise no one is going to tackle this kind of topic. So we need to think about new fora to talk about this. So at a European scale, with the ITU, with the International Space Summit, maybe tomorrow in Paris. And we need to find a way to put everyone around the table to talk about what's going to happen next in space.
Thank you very much for this word of conclusion. I will close the panel. Many thanks for your intervention, and I give you the word, dear two. Thank you very much for organizing this, and you have the stage.
Thank you so much, Cecile. I know that I am the last hurdle standing between you and the drinks, but please allow me a few minutes to briefly reflect on this, what was, I think, a very rich and stimulating afternoon, and also to offer some thanks. So space is not a topic that we at the Jacques Delors Centre normally work on in our day-to-day think tank work. Nevertheless, when our team suggested space as a topic for this Research Meets Politics meeting, I thought it made a lot of sense. Not only because of the strong Franco-German dimension that we have also tackled today, but because at the Jacques Delors Centre, much of our work is geared towards contributing to European sovereignty. And of course, space infrastructure and defense in space has emerged as one of the most critical dimensions of achieving the sovereignty. If sovereignty means then in Europe having the ability to make our own decisions, to rely on our own assets, and to act without others interfering or objecting to our choices, then space infrastructure is precisely the kind of strategic resource that we need, and one that beyond defense can also provide a boost to innovation. So investment in this infrastructure serves a common European purpose, and that should also be reflected in how they are designed and governed, because the decisions we make today will shape Europe for years and decades to come. And what I have learned today is that space today is what the internet was in the 1990s or the cars were in 1930. So if we look at the trajectory of those fields where they have gone, I think it is safe to say that any decisions we will take now will have a lasting and meaningful impact. So I very much hope that today's discussion have helped identify pathways towards deeper European cooperation within and around a Franco-German core on space. Of course, none of today's discussion would have been possible without the many partners who have contributed to this event, not least our excellent speakers and moderators, whom I would like to thank very warmly. I would also like to thank the French Embassy for the continued cooperation on this series, and especially Ambassador Delattre for his hospitality, and of course the embassy staff for the always seamless collaboration. Our thanks also go to the Federal Foreign Office for making the Pariser Platz dialogue possible through their support, and of course my thanks go to the team at Jacques Delors Centre for organizing this event. And one very final point before we close and can go to the reception, you will find a QR code on your seats or next to your seats, I think, for our feedback survey. And it will only take 1 minute to complete, but would help us very much in improving our format. So if you could take that minute, we would be very grateful. And with that, I think the only thing that is waiting for us is the reception. And I would like to warmly invite you to join us for a drink and continue the discussion upstairs. Thank you.